Welcome to OT Insights. My name is Ed Rojas. This is a space that brings real conversations with leaders who work every day in industrial security. And today I am joined by Dan Ricci. He's the CEO of Industrial Data Works and founder of the ICS Advisory Project, a leading resource for OT vulnerability intelligence, which I'm pretty sure a lot of you have seen it on LinkedIn. It's a great tool and a great source for people in the OT environment. So very excited to have you here, Dan. How are you, buddy? Long time no hear.
I'm good. Thank you, Ed, for having me today. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So you work directly with asset owners, with utilities, manufacturers, co-ops, and co-ops is an interesting one. You see their environments up close. So let's to start this conversation. How would you describe this current state of OT vulnerability? Let's say vulnerability management and their cyber readiness.
Most of the organizations have an idea of what their risks are. They lack clarity in understanding what their OT devices are running, like the version of software firmware. They might have minimal documentation. There's a constant stream of advisories coming out from vendors, CVEs, the CISA, ICS advisories, but they don't really share the context, based off of like the asset owner environment. They definitely want to improve their visibility and understanding of these vulnerabilities. But the challenge is, I mean, it's a lot of it's the raw data, turning that raw data into something that they can act on and implement in their operations.
You said a lot of things that it's typical of, if we weren't talking about OT, I would say that's typical to IT, right? There are minimal documentation, multiple vendors, multiple advisors with no context. So basically, they're dealing with the same crap, basically, that it's existing in the IT world. Nothing new.
Yes, I would say yes and no. They're dealing with the same challenges. I think uh, the operational criticality and the safety are paramount over in OT environments, which you don't necessarily have in IT environments. IT environments could have business operational criticality, whereas if you're looking at like a manufacturing or a power generation uh, situation, they are they are they're different, right?
Mm. Yeah, as you said, life. One deals with life, the other one deals with business implications. So
Yeah, critical infrastructure, right?
yeah,
Viruses like business operations.
yeah.
Civilization's not going to collapse if an email server goes down.
Exactly. But both are important depending, as you said, context, right?
Yes.
Is extremely important. So, based on the work that you've done with the ICS advisory project, when you look across different sectors, what are the main patterns that you see today?
The different sections, I think there's they struggle with the asset visibility, uh, especially in small and medium-sized asset owners. They can't afford some of the more expensive solutions. Teams themselves at the small, medium-sized asset owners, they like within, cooperatives, utilities, small manufacturers, they're unsure of what their models and firmware versions and builds that are in production per se or in operations. They might only know what was basically installed through their as-built
Mm.
diagrams. They also are relying on outdated spreadsheets. Spreadsheets done in Excel
Precious rules.
still rule. There's an advisory overload. There's like going, okay, they hear, their CVEs. They might know about CISA advisories. They probably know about their vendor advisories or security notifications. The known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. They may know about that. They may not. They may be tracking it, but I mean, they lack really like a way to like really filter and focus on like what is actually applicable to them. Then the third part would be like, the context gaps. You know, as I mentioned, they know that CVEs exist, but they don't know how it applies to like their devices if they don't know like the versioning, like firmware, uh, the functionality and where it sits at within the Purdue model level. If that's what their network environment is actually built to. I mean,
Mm.
I mean, theoretically, it's definitely probably laid out like that, but maybe not so much when you're talking about like the security zones that might not
Yeah.
exist at all. It might be just flat, but you're still going to have like level one, level zero, level one devices, level two, level three
On the
devices,
same,
right?
yeah. Mm.
But it doesn't mean that they're actually like segmented, right? And
Functionality wise,
right,
you segmented,
yeah,
but in reality, they're
yeah.
not. Okay.
Uh, you know, the whole vendor ecosystem, if they should patch now, later, or never, that vendor might have gone out of business years ago, so
Oof.
there are no patches for it anymore. So,
Is that
but
common? Is that very common in the industry?
I would say in manufacturing, very much so,
Wow.
because there might be a CNC machine that was produced years ago that they still use that's running on Windows 95, but
Yeah.
that's the system that's running that produces that specific part that they sell.
So
So
yeah.
it's not as easy as just like, oh, you're just gonna patch in, you're gonna be
Yeah, is that
fine.
gonna
Like,
work?
no,
Yeah.
that's not gonna work. So, but we also see that, uh, vendors, even small, they realize that they need to start becoming more cybersecurity savvy, have better uh, cybersecurity, you know, process and procedures to protect their critical assets. There's a growing need to have a better correlation across these different sources of vulnerability information. Operators want a simpler way to map the advisories, affected products, risk levels, to their exact environment. That's where like tools like the ICS Advisor Project can help. They provide that dashboard interface. That's a free open source tool that they can go through and filter on the vendors and products that are in their environment, and uh, export that list from the dashboard as it's funny, it's a CSV file, but like as we said, everyone's kind of working with
Mhm.
spreadsheets anyways, but it's something they're familiar with by having a steep learning curve on learning a more complex um, a platform, especially if they're just operators and they're not cybersecurity specialists. But the data is normalized. It's not like they have to format it themselves, and gives them that clear picture that they can trust and start to develop like a patch management program.
The strategy, their cybersecurity roadmap, correct? Which is
Yeah,
extremely important. Yeah.
yeah. There's some fundamental things you need to kind of have in place, but we won't get into that too much. But asset inventory is very helpful, especially if it's current.
Yes, yes. Again, it's funny because again, step 20, number one and two, right? Your inventory, hardware, and software is very important, and it also applies to OT. Um, so that when you go to an organization and you assess that organization's maturity, or you support the analysis, the report that has been created, by consulting firms, and you take a look at it, what maturity patterns appear in when you do this?
I think what we see over and over again, it's pretty much the same, is a lot of times there's no authoritative like inventory.
Which is what we just
Yeah,
finished saying.
right. The mapping of devices and known advisories, that doesn't
That
exist.
doesn't exist. Yeah.
Yeah, the visibility into like the the vulnerabilities that matter for their specific vendors and product line, that doesn't really exist. There's they might have, if they're actually maturing, and they have started, tracking vulnerabilities. They probably haven't looked at, is there known exploits that are affecting these specific, vendor products
Mm.
based off of the vulnerability that's identified. That's not common, but that's also kind of part of the whole cybersecurity maturity process, and then, you know, the persistent separation between IT and OT teams,
Yeah.
that communication still lacks, even though, it's better than it probably was, like depending on the organization, 10 years ago, it's gradually improved more so because, OT's a more common, OT cybersecurity is a more commonly discussed term. But, IT might only be the only part of the OT environment that IT might touch might be just the network backbone. They don't really touch anything else. They like, well, those servers and engineering workstations, those belong to the OT team, and they have a service level agreement with this contractor that installs system, and they're responsible for it. So I don't care. It's kind of like a
Basically, pass the ball. Yeah.
hands off thing. But if like an incident occurs and there's no, no like teamwork and like no sort of like established roles of responsibilities and a communication plan to make that happen, then it's not very good for organization in those situations.
Do we see
So
that? Do we see that a lot? Like a lack of governance and incident response planning, things like that, or they just not
I
mature enough?
I in more mature organizations, OT is included in the incident response plan.
Okay.
In smaller and medium-sized organizations, uh, it's it's a gap. It's a common gap where they have to work towards uh, addressing it. Tabletop exercises for incident response or even emergency response that includes incident response is very helpful to help
Mm.
identify that gap. It's like going, where's the OT team? Oh, we didn't we
Oops.
didn't invite we didn't invite them. Depending
Uh,
on who's running the
yeah.
tabletop scenario,
Yeah.
that's savvy. But I bring that up because it's a gap. We know this.
Yeah. So that's interesting because that leads into the next question, right? So what gaps repeat across most plans? Most plants, sorry. My English sometimes leaves
No,
me
no,
wanting.
you know, it, I, you know, the, you're talking about, if you're talking about from a vulnerability data perspective, I mean, normalization of the data, receiving the information from multiple sources with no consistency. Like they don't have a process of like how they track, vulnerability data that's applicable to their systems. And we talked about how the lack of context, they 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 get an advisory. They know it discusses the vulnerability, but does it apply to like their OT system and devices? But you know, and how does it fit in with their industrial process and prioritization? Is that OT device a critical asset that they can't just push or patch because it could potentially take down operations. And that goes into like a whole different discussion that we could have on uh, the whole vulnerability management process and patch management process that would be, helpful to implementing and managing the whole identification of the vulnerability, patch and testing before deploying into the operational environment. And all that's covered in like the ISA IEC 62443
Yeah.
2TAC3 industrial patch
Now you're just
management
showing off.
program. But but that's like the kind of like gets the point of like kind of like you know knowing 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 how to apply and manage vulnerabilities nearby.
Yes.
There very much might be the situation where it's like going, no, we don't patch. We can't. It's just not an option, and that's completely fine. But what are your compensating controls for it?
So, yeah, and that leads us to the next question then, right? So, without naming names, can you describe a typical environment that you encounter? And I'm assuming it will include that we can't patch. So let's look at compensating, but give us an idea of a typical environment that you encounter.
Oh, you could have a medium-sized facility, right, that has equipment that could stretch back from that has like three generations of OT equipment to maybe five or six. So you're talking about equipment that might stay in an environment for 10 to 20 years
Yeah,
because that's just reality of
that's how it works.
industrial environments, right?
Well,
There was Ed and I did an assessment with a customer where they had reactors that were taken down only every 2 years. So when a reactor was running, they couldn't patch it, obviously. They had to wait for that 2 years before they applied patch
cycle.
during
Yeah.
that downtime. So their patch cycle was very different. Field devices will run with old firmware for a very long time. So, you can't apply like the IT vulnerability management process into a OT environment because it impacts operations and safety of the environment.
But at the
HMI,
same time, but that's the tricky. So that's where the compensating control part comes in, right?
yes,
Because
exactly.
because it doesn't matter. You identify this as it hasn't been patched in decades. So what do you do? What do you see companies or plants doing then? Like a compensating virtual patching, any segmentation, anything like that.
Segmentation's a big one. Uh, Firewall monitoring that help also reinforce segmentation. I mean, we always joke that air gap environment's not technically secure. You know, yes, it's secure from the internet, and that security through obscurity is is out there, but it's not really secure. You really need to still monitor. You should, even if it's a air gapped environment, there should be monitoring. And a lot of times, these air gapped environments have a way to get into the environment through like a jump host that's
Mm-hmm.
behind like
Because he
existing
has to.
firewall
Yeah.
because they have to get into it.
Yeah.
So who's watching the jump host? Who's monitoring that session? Are your sessions scheduled with that vendor when they do remote access in for patching? I mean, there's a lot of like layers
That go into, yeah.
to managing security and isolated environments. So it's not a well fire and forget. We're
Mm.
good. We're set up. We're good. You know, yeah, we're not patching this environment, but we should monitor it for exposure because this environment contains systems that we consider crown jewels.
Yeah.
They're critical
Absolutely.
to our operations.
We have like 2 minutes.
No, I'm
So
sorry.
no, 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 no. This is. I mean, this 30 minutes go by fast. Um, what practical steps should an organization take first in 2026? Let's say this is Dan's do. Dan's recommendations.
First off, establish a clean and accurate asset inventory. The device, the vendor, product line, firmware version, software version. Uh, Understand the criticality of that device in operations, whether it's a crown jewel or not, how it impacts an operation, so you can understand the risk. I also understand the patch level. Where is it last patch? Uh, Correlate that inventory to known advisories so you know whether there's existing, vulnerabilities that apply to it. That'll help determine whether you're going to patch now, later, or never. Depending
Mm,
going back to the criticality of that system. Uh, Build a prioritization model based on the exploitable vulnerabilities, vendor guidance, because there might be only a workaround. There might not be a patch because
yeah.
that product's going end of life, and understand the operational impact to it before you even consider doing patching. Once that foundation exists, everything becomes a little bit easier. It'll assist your instant response. It supports your supply chain risk management monitoring. It folds into your segmentation, but the real progress starts when the organization can trust their data because it's accurate, updated, and clean. So
Okay, that's cool. So to summarize really quickly, focus on visibility, know your assets, location, understand context, and then definitely as one of the points you made at the beginning about IT and OT teams, not engaging, make sure that they start to engage, communicate, correct?
start with what you have, focus on the visibility and knowing what your assets and your locations are, focus on the context, OT asset type criticality of to the operations. Keep IT, OT, and engineering aligned. And then when you build that from that accurate data, a simple plan will come out of it and you'll reduce risk without complicating operations. That's a start. That's a really good start.
And that takes a while. I mean, it's not something that's going to take like 1 week and you're done. It's like, no, that's throughout the whole year and then maintain it.
Yeah, we wish, but nothing's simple because human beings are complicated and there's a lot of everyone's got competing priorities.
Absolutely. Well, Dan, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for being part of this series of conversations on OT Insights. Looking forward to engaging with all of you in the continuing days, and hopefully 2026 is a good year for cybersecurity and OT.
All right.
Let's hope.
Nick,
Thank you
agree.
so
Yeah,
much.
that's great. Thank you, Ed. Great time. Thank you.